Hello, how's it going, everybody? Today we're jumping into Ezekiel chapter 41. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Let me see if we're lagging. We can get our Bibles out in the meantime. Okay, we're good. I'm wearing like a green shirt. I was wondering if it will. Yeah, that is messing with the green screen. Okay. Okay, so Ezekiel chapter 41. On Friday, we started talking about a temple that God is showing Ezekiel in a vision. Very specific details here. Just like when God revealed the plans for the tabernacle and Solomon's temple, right? We got measurements. We got a full-on blueprint, right? The materials used and everything. And here, yesterday at least, we were talking about measurements and everything as well in chapter 40. All the gateways, right? The eastern gateway, northern, southern, the gates for the inner and outer courts. We were talking about very detailed measurements, and then I put in the description of in the comment section. No, the description of yesterday's video. Friday's video of some people had created visual representations of what is in the text, right? What it would have looked like with the specific measurements. So like a little mock-up blueprint of what it would look like. My Bible had said, where is it? It says here, like it has like a little diagram of the temple, right? And it says, the temple existed only in a vision of Ezekiel and was never actually built, as were the temples of Solomon, Zerubbabel, and Herod. But some premillennial interpreters believe that it will be built in the future. So, premillennial interpreters, what are premillennial interpreters? Okay, so I'm thinking like maybe this could be the temple in the New Jerusalem. Pre-millennial, so prior to the millennium reign. Did I spell premillennial wrong? Okay, no. Premillennialism. The doctrine that Christ will soon return to set up an earthly kingdom for 1,000 years. Okay, so an earthly kingdom for 1,000 years instead of it being God reigning for 1,000 years from heaven. This is premillennialism is the 1,000-year reign of Christ here on earth. And so on earth, I'm guessing that this is going to be that temple. So that's what these people believe. But then I think, again, after that, isn't Jesus going to descend and create the new Jerusalem and the new temple on earth? And so could that be what this is? What do you guys think? Or is this never going to come to pass? And then if so, why go into such detail? Maybe we'll get some clues as we continue reading on today. Let's see. Chapter 41, we're starting off with the dimensions of the sanctuary. Come on, why would we go into such detail like this if we're not even going to make use of it? This is God giving Ezekiel the outline. Why would God give something to Ezekiel and not make use of it? Anyways, let's see. Hopefully we'll get some clues as we continue reading today. Ezekiel chapter 41.
Then he brought me into the sanctuary and measured the doorposts, 6 cubits wide on one side and 6 cubits wide on the other side, the width of the tabernacle. The width of the entryway was 10 cubits, and the side walls of the entrance were 5 cubits on this side and 5 cubits on the other side. And he measured its length, 40 cubits, and its width, 20 cubits.
Remember, this isn't God that's measuring. This is, remember, God brought Ezekiel to this guy, this man. And he had a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand. Right? God took Ezekiel there to the land of Israel. And behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze. He had a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand, and he stood there in the gateway. And that is the man that's measuring all of these things.
Also he went inside and measured the doorposts, 2 cubits, and the entrance, 6 cubits high, and
so they're
the width of
walking
the
through
entrance,
this
7 cubits.
temple,
He measured the length, 20 cubits,
measuring it right
and
there
the width,
for him to see.
20 cubits, beyond the sanctuary. And he said to me,
"This is the most holy place."
Next he measured the wall of the temple, 6
And
cubits.
God told Ezekiel to tell
the width
people
of
what he
each
saw.
side chamber all around the temple was 4 cubits on every side. The side chambers were in 3 stories, one above the other, 30 chambers in each story. They rested on ledges which were for the side chambers all around, that they might be supported, but not fastened to the wall of the temple. As one went up from story to story, the side chambers became wider all around, because their supporting ledges in the wall of the temple ascended like steps. Therefore the width of the structure increased as one went up from the lowest story to the highest by way of the middle one. I also saw an elevation all around the temple. It was the foundation of the side chambers, a full rod, that is, 6 cubits high. The thickness of the outer wall of the side chambers was 5 cubits, and so also the remaining terrace by the place of the side chambers of the temple. And between it and the wall chambers was a width of 20 cubits all around the temple on every side. The doors of the side chambers opened on the terrace, one door toward the north and another toward the south, and the width of the terrace was 5 cubits all around. The building that faced the separating courtyard at its western end was 70 cubits wide. The wall of the building was 5 cubits thick all around, and its length 90 cubits. So he measured the temple, 100 cubits long, and the separating courtyard with the building and its walls was 100 cubits long. Also the width of the eastern face of the temple, including the separating courtyard, was 100 cubits. He measured the length of the building behind it, facing the separating courtyard, with its galleries on the one side and on the other side, 100 cubits, as well as the inner temple and the porches of the court, their doorposts, and the beveled window frames. And the galleries all around their 3 stories opposite the threshold were paneled with wood from the ground to the windows. The windows were covered from the space above the door, even to the inner room, as well as outside and on every wall all around, inside and outside, by measure. And it was made with cherubim and palm trees, a palm tree between cherub and cherub. Each cherub had 2 faces, so that the face of a man was toward a palm tree on one side, and the face of a young lion toward a palm tree on the other side. Thus it was made throughout the temple all around, from the floor to the space above the door, and on the wall of the sanctuary, cherubim and palm trees were carved. The doorposts of the temple were square, as was the front of the sanctuary. Their appearance was similar. The altar was of wood, 3 cubits high, and its length 2 cubits. Its corners, its length, and its sides were of wood. And he said to me,
This is the table that is before the Lord.
the temple and the sanctuary had 2 doors. The doors had 2 panels apiece, 2 folding panels, 2 panels for one door and 2 panels for the other door. Cherubim and palm trees were carved on the doors of the temple, just as they were carved on the walls. A wooden canopy was on the front of the vestibule outside. There were beveled window frames and palm trees on one side and on the other, on the sides of the vestibule, also on the side chambers of the temple and on the canopies.
There's a lot to follow. I was trying to follow along with the picture. Oh, there's a lot going on here.
Then he brought me out into the outer court, by the way toward the north. And he brought me into the chamber which was opposite the separating courtyard, and which was opposite the building toward the north, facing the length, which was 100 cubits. The width was 50 cubits, was the north door. Opposite the inner court of 20 cubits, and opposite the pavement of the outer court, was gallery against gallery in 3 stories. In front of the chambers, toward the inside, was a walk 10 cubits wide, at a distance of 1 cubit, and their doors faced north. Now the upper chambers were shorter, because the galleries took away space from them more than from the lower and middle stories of the building. For they were in 3 stories, and did not have pillars like the pillars of the courts. Therefore the upper level was shortened more than the lower and middle levels from the ground up. And a wall which was outside ran parallel to the chambers, at the front of the chambers, toward the outer court. Its length was 50 cubits. The length of the chambers toward the outer court was 50 cubits, whereas that facing the temple was 100 cubits. At the lower chambers was the entrance on the east side, as one goes into them from the outer court. Also there were chambers in the thickness of the wall of the court toward the east, opposite the separating courtyard and opposite the building. There was a walk in front of them also, and their appearance was like the chambers which were toward the north. They were as long and as wide as the others, and all their exits and entrances were according to plan. And corresponding to the doors of the chambers that were facing south, as one enters them, there was a door in front of the walk, the way directly in front of the wall toward the east. Then he said to me,
The north chambers and the south chambers, which are opposite the separating courtyard, are the holy chambers, where the priests who approach the Lord shall eat the most holy offerings. There they shall lay the most holy offerings, the grain offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering, for the place is holy. When the priests enter them, they shall not go out of the holy chamber into the outer court, but there they shall leave their garments in which they minister, for they are holy. They shall put on other garments. Then they may approach that which is for the people.
Now when he had finished measuring the inner temple, he brought me out through the gateway that faces toward the east, and measured it all around. He measured the east side with the measuring rod, 500 rods by the measuring rod all around. He measured the north side, 500 rods by the measuring rod all around. He measured the south side, 500 rods by the measuring rod. He came around to the west side and measured 500 rods by the measuring rod. He measured it on the 4 sides. It had a wall all around, 500 cubits long and 500 wide, to separate the holy areas from the common.
So that's why we have that square shape of the temple, the walls around it.
Afterward, he brought me to the gate that faces toward the east. And behold, The glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east. His voice was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. It was like the appearance of the vision which I saw, like the vision which I saw when I came to destroy the city. The visions were like the vision which I saw by the river Kibar.
We talked about that for an extensive amount of time. The living creatures, the cherubim, right? So his voice was like the sound of many waters. And we talked about that also, the sound. The earth shone with his glory. It was like the appearance of the vision which I saw, like the vision which I saw when I came to destroy the city. The visions were like the vision which I saw by the river Kibar. So I'm guessing he saw the figure that was glowing, like how he saw the image of the man. Or he could be just talking about it in general, where it was like unlike anything he's ever seen before. Like a powerful image, a very different image. You know, something that's going to stick with you. He could be talking about it in that way, or he could be talking about like he saw something similar.
Destroy the city. The visions were like the vision which I saw by the river Kibar, and I fell on my face. And the glory of the Lord came into the temple.
Or he could have felt the same thing. Like now immediately he's talking about the glory of the Lord, right? And we saw the glory of the Lord in that original vision because of just, I don't know, like the images he saw just exuded power, right? Like spiritual, godly power. And so maybe he's feeling that same intensity in this vision.
By way of the gate which faces toward the east, the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court.
That happened in that original vision.
And behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. Then I heard him speaking to me from the temple, while a man stood beside me.
Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever.
So God is revealing himself to Ezekiel as a man. Then I heard him speaking to me from the temple while a man stood beside me. Okay, so that man could be someone else. Maybe it could be, could that be Jesus? Could that be the bronze figure that was measuring out the temple? And he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever.
No more shall the house of Israel defile my holy name, they nor their kings, by their harlotry, or with the carcasses of their kings on their high places. When they set their threshold
They
by my
sacrificed
threshold, and their doorpost by my doorpost,
or they had their
with a wall
kings on
between them and me,
offered them to
they
their gods?
defiled my holy name by the abominations which they committed. Therefore I have consumed them in my anger. Now let them put their harlotry and the carcasses of their kings far away from me, and I will dwell in their midst forever. Son of man, describe the temple to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern. And if they are ashamed of all that they have done, make known to them the design of the temple, and its arrangement, its exits and its entrances, its entire design, and all its ordinances, all its forms, and all its laws. Write it down in their sight, so that they may keep its whole design and all its ordinances, and perform them. This is the law of the temple. The whole area surrounding the mountaintop is most holy. Behold, This is the law of the temple. These are the measurements of the altar.
So it was God saying, hey, show them this temple. Show them the laws you need to follow while you're in this temple. And let them be ashamed because this is what you could have been. But also, you're going to perform them. Write it down in their sight so that they may keep its whole design and all its ordinances and perform them. So it sounded like God was expecting them at some point to build it and perform the acts that were required in the temple. Yet, according to my Bible, it was never built. So that's very interesting. I got to look up a commentary right now, actually. Let me do that before I forget. Ezekiel. Actually, let me look up 40. Because that's when we first started talking about the temple. Declare to the house of Israel everything you see. The audience for this vision was primarily the house of Israel. It was most relevant to them as part of God's promised future restoration. What Ezekiel saw, as recorded in Ezekiel 40-48, has been the subject of much dispute, and is something of a dividing line for biblical interpreters. In his commentary, John B. Taylor listed 4 different interpretive approaches to these chapters. Here we go. Literal prophetic. Ezekiel 40-48 describes a temple that he expected would be built by the returning exiles in their restoration to the land. For example, Adam Clarke believed that Ezekiel simply gave the plan of Solomon's temple from memory and set it here as an encouragement to the exiles that they would be in fact be restored to Jerusalem and the temple would be rebuilt. Okay, that's an interesting take as well. Basically, he's saying that, I doubt that what we're reading right now is just Ezekiel reciting from memory what he thought the Solomon's temple measurements were. And yesterday Friday we were looking at the comparison, right? I doubt that. Ezekiel's temple. Because if you look at the different temples, right? Look at the difference. Solomon's temple, Ezekiel's temple. Ezekiel's temple, no way he would have got the measurements wrong by that much. And even if he did get the measurements wrong by that much, this is rectangle, this is square. The layout, the positioning of the altar is different. The layout, it's all completely different. So I do not think that he's reciting what he believed, what he remembered as Solomon's temple, the plans for Solomon's temple. Makes no sense.
Most holy.
Oh, wait. Okay. Symbolic Christian, Ezekiel 40-48 symbolically describes the Christian church. Smith described this perspective. The best approach is to see these chapters as illustrative of spiritual truths. The main point thus symbolized in these chapters are: God would provide for his people a temple, a priesthood, and a worship system related to, but different from, that which they had formerly known. A united people, including Gentiles, would occupy the inheritance which God had promised to their forefathers. Okay, if that's the case, would you give such specific, detailed information, especially to a people that are just newly being reformed and the cities being newly built. They're readopting their practices, right? So they're building their faith from the foundation again, and you're giving such specific details. And when you have such specific details, you think that, and God is giving them, you think that you should act on them, but then nothing happens. I don't know. That doesn't seem like a good look if this was the goal here. If this was the goal, why not just say that plainly? So I'm not with this. I don't think this is the case either. With this one, I agree. I think I could see the first half of it. Like this was probably a temple that was to be built, but it just wasn't built. But this part here, how it says Ezekiel simply gave the plan for Solomon's temple from memory. Yeah, because memory is completely gone if that's the case. So dispensationalist. Ezekiel 40 to 48 describes a temple of features of a coming millennial age. That's what that's one of the interpretations my Bible mentioned, and that's what this mentioned here too. Millennial temple. This future temple belongs not so much to the eternal age, as in Revelation 21 to 22. We'll get to that. But to the period of a literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus over this earth. Okay, so this is not the temple that's coming down, establishing the new Jerusalem. This is the temple during Jesus' reign on this earth, and that's what we saw. That's what my Bible said, right? The premillennialism or something like that. Where was that? The premillennial interpretation. That people believe that Jesus is going to come back to earth and reign on earth. That millennial reign, the millennium is going to take place on earth instead of reigning in heaven. People believe that. That's what they're saying. This future temple belongs not so much to the eternal age as in Revelation 21 to 20, chapter 21, verse 22, but to the period of a literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus over this earth. Especially for the Jewish people in the millennium, Ezekiel's temple will bring to remembrance and memorialize God's gracious work for Israel and the rich types and ceremonies that looked forward to the perfect work of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Okay, but if this is the case, wouldn't this be mentioned by John in Revelation? Wouldn't he be like, whoa, call back. Remember what I learned about in Ezekiel? I'm seeing it now. I feel like that would be mentioned. Well, we'll find out depending on the way Revelation is written when we read it. So, especially for the Jewish people in the millennium, Ezekiel's temple will bring to remembrance and memorialize God's gracious work for Israel and the rich types and ceremonies that looked forward to the perfect work of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. This view declares that the prediction speaks of the restoration and establishment of the people of Israel in their own land in the last days of their national history. Their conversion to the Lord through faith in their long-rejected Messiah and the manifest presence and glory of the Lord in their midst. I guess I could sort of see something like this. Because it's in the future. Who's to say, you know? Apocalyptic. Ezekiel 40 to 48 present symbolic and fantastic images of a coming age, connected to images and ideas popular in the pagan world of that day. Ezekiel 40 to 48 replace the conventional prophecies of Ezekiel 33 to 37 with imagery that is primarily mythic. 33 to 37. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of your people and say to them, when I bring the sword upon a land, Babylon is the sword, and the people of the land take a man from their territory and make them their watchmen, which I don't think happened. Or Ezekiel was kind of the watchman. When he sees the sword coming upon the land, if he blows the trumpet and warns the people, yeah, but Ezekiel acted as that. Then whoever hears the sound of the trumpet and does not take warning, if the sword comes and takes him away, his blood shall be on his own head. He heard the sound of the trumpet. Okay, we talked about this. But this is not talking about any temple. That is talking about the judgment that we've been talking about for quite a while. So how does Ezekiel 40 to 48 replace the conventional prophecies of Ezekiel 33 to 37 with imagery that is primarily mythic? We're just talking about a blueprint for a temple. Maybe we got to continue to 48 to find out. The prophet chooses to speak about Jerusalem's future by recasting imagery deriving from the ancient Near Eastern mythic motif of the cosmic mountain. Yeah, we got to keep reading, I guess. This commentary will examine these chapters primarily under the dispensationalist framework. So this one here, the premillennial idea. The reader must decide whether to favor a more literal approach or a more figurative and spiritual approach. Though there are things to be said for and against each approach, yeah, there definitely are. In the author's opinion, the best approach is to regard this temple as real, yet to be fulfilled in a future phase of God's unfolding plan of the ages. The fundamental weakness of the literal prophetic approach is that it was not fulfilled. The temple rebuilt in the days of Ezra and Zerubbabel did not answer to this description. It does not correspond to the one that was built after the return, nor to Herod's temple. The fundamental weakness of the symbolic approach is that the entire tone of Ezekiel's record points to this temple as something real, not spiritualized, right? Because just from the detail, the measurements and everything. Significantly, the radiant being did not say much to Ezekiel, probably only calling out the measurements. Yeah, only measurements. We didn't get any vertical description at all. It was just literally the layout. Well, so far that's the case. Significantly, the radiant being did not say much to Ezekiel, probably only calling out the measurements. There was no explanation or pointing towards a symbolic interpretation of the temple, only a detailed tour and specific dimensions. Yeah, because they were in it. Ezekiel said that they were actually there measuring it in his vision. The message is that this temple is real, not metaphorical. Okay, but then you want to... Okay, so I'm curious as to whoever wrote this, do they believe that the cherubim was real? Because the way Ezekiel described that was real, not metaphorical. You know? And the way he was speaking about eating the scroll that God gave him, putting God's words into his mouth, and it tasted sweet. It sounded like he was literally eating it, but, you know, that could be very metaphorical. And that was also a vision. Like, this is also a vision. The message is that this temple is real, not metaphorical. It is visionary and prophetic, yet real. This symbolic view was favored by the church fathers and the reformers. They saw in these chapters Christ and the spiritual endowments of the church in the Christian era. This is entirely too subjective and would mean nothing for Ezekiel or his contemporaries. Yeah. And God told Ezekiel to tell his contemporaries. So Alexander adds the figurative or spiritualizing interpretive approach does not seem to solve any of the problems of Ezekiel 40 to 48. It tends to create new ones. When the interpreter abandons a normal grammatical, historical, hermeneutic because the passage does not seem to make sense taken that way and opts for an interpretive procedure by which he can allegorize, symbolize, and spiritualize, the interpretations become subjective. The different aspects of a passage mean whatever the interpreter desires. Yeah. The fundamental weakness of the apocalyptic approach is that this text lacks many of the generally understood aspects of apocalyptic literature. The idea, and this is going to be good to know when we jump into Daniel and Revelation. The idea that this temple and various aspects regarding it should be understood as fulfilled in a future phase of God's unfolding plan of the ages has its own problems. Perhaps the plainest and commonly made objection is that since Jesus made a perfect and final sacrifice, it is unthinkable that God would establish or sanction any kind of sacrificial system or ceremony. Boom. Oh, big point right there. Yeah, that's a big point. If this is going to be taking place after Jesus sacrificed himself, or God sacrificed his son, Jesus died for our sins as the ultimate sacrifice, doing away with ritual sacrifice and that whole ceremonial system, why would we establish any kind of sacrificial system or ceremony into the very blueprints of this temple? That's a good point. That's a real good point. There are several ways to answer this objection. Okay, let's see the answers. We would never think that the old covenant system of sacrifice and ritual would be restored for believers as a ground of their approach to God or their righteousness. We would never think that animal sacrifice could atone for or take away sin, something accomplished only by what Jesus did on the cross. Yet it must be recognized that animal sacrifices never took away sin. They only looked forward to the perfect sacrifice God would provide through the Messiah, fulfilled at the cross of Jesus. Okay, yeah, I get all that. But what was this saying? Perhaps a plainest and commonly made objection is that since Jesus made a perfect and final sacrifice, it is unthinkable that God would establish or sanction any kind of sacrificial ceremony, system or ceremony. There are several ways to answer this objection. So far, these objections have been siding with this. I mean, so far, all of these answers seem to be siding the objection. So I'm kind of confused here. God does sanction memorial and ceremonial remembrance of the work of Jesus on the cross. God does sanction memorials and ceremonial remembrance of the work of Jesus on the cross? Just as the Old Testament sacrifices could have value in pointing forward to the death of Christ, why may they not have equal in what am I reading? Just as the Old Testament sacrifices could have value in pointing forward to the death of Christ, why may they not have equal value in pointing back to the death of Christ as an accomplished fact? I don't get the question. Just as the Old Testament sacrifices could have value in pointing forward to the death of Christ, okay, I get that part. Why may they not have equal value in pointing back to the death of Christ as an accomplished fact? Oh, okay. So these Old Testament sacrifices can point forward to the death of Christ, but why not? Why couldn't they also not be pointing to the death of Christ as already being done? Okay, but if it's already being done, why are you pointing it to being already being done and you're doing the sacrifice? Because then you're looking at the big picture and you're seeing, hey, what's the point of doing these sacrifices? There's really no point in it. And David saw that. We talked about that. David saw that the actual act of the sacrifice is not the point, right? It's the intent and the character behind the person doing the sacrifice. God doesn't care about some roasted ram or goat or ox or anything like that. It's behind the act. What's going on behind the act. So the celebration of the Lord's Supper through the Christian centuries has added not one infinitesimal particle to the efficacy of the work of Christ on the cross, but who will dare to deny that it has value for the believer, since it is enjoined upon us as a memorial? Okay. The celebration of the Lord's Supper through the Christian centuries has added not one infinitesimal particle to the efficacy of the work of Christ on the cross, but who will dare to deny that it has value for the believer, since it is enjoined upon us as a memorial? Okay, and then you're looking at sacrifice as a memorial. So if this was built for the millennial reign of Christ, and we're sacrificing as a memorial to what Jesus did for us. Okay, interesting. We got some comments in the chat. Forgiveness is the key. When you forgive, God forgives. How can you forgive? By remembering your mistakes. You erase those by forgiving those. Oh, it's Ricky. Hey, Ricky. How you doing, man? It's been a while, huh? What happened to my mustache? I trim it. It grows out and I trim it. Ricky, do you have any thoughts about this Ezekiel's temple? I find it really odd that it was never built. It is cool. But do you think that this is a temple that's going to be built, that will be built on earth in the millennial reign? Or is this just never going to be built? Or like, what's your take on it? I'm curious to see what you have to say about this. Let me keep reading this in the meantime. So Jesus specifically said that he would observe the Lord's Supper in the age to come as a memorial. So you can sacrifice as a memorial. Okay, I get where they're coming from with this. There will be active, even ceremonial remembrance of the sacrificial work of Jesus in the age to come. It is reasonable to think it could also include the temple services and sacrifices described here. If the Lord's table is a memorial and the sacrifices of the Ezekiel system are memorials, the two should not in any way conflict with each other, but should be able to coexist. All right, Alexander, I get where you're coming from. You think it's going to be built? I mean, yeah, because it's such detailed because it's such a detailed plan, like Solomon's temple, like the tabernacle. Because it's so detailed, I would think that it's going to be built. It's hard to feel like it's going to be used, like the plans and everything are to be used as some sort of elaborate metaphor. Apparently, the first Christians, including Apostle Paul, were more comfortable with some kind of participation with temple services and rituals than we might think. Paul's participation with and sponsorship of Christians fulfilling vows at the temple seemingly connected with some kind of sacrifice speaking to this. Okay, we'll jump into that when we get to Acts, I guess. I never thought about that. The early church Christians, did they continue on with Jewish sacrifice or did they stop? Even in our day, we see the spiritual value and great avenue of worship for church believers as they celebrate the Passover service. It does not enter their minds that they are saved by the observance of this service. Right. It's not salvation through acts. That the celebration is an extremely instructive, vivid picture lesson of the death of the Lamb of God. And there we go, right? This temple is extremely vivid. The picture is extremely vivid. God's laws and practices for the sacrificial procedure is very instructive and detailed. Again, Alexander, I see where you're coming from here. Have I heard of the demon slayers? No, I have never. I don't think I've heard of the Demon Slayers. I know there's an anime called Demon Slayer. I never watched it. But yeah, I don't think I've heard of the Demon Slayers. In many ways, the description of Ezekiel's temple is presented in a way appropriate for a period after the finished work of Jesus Christ. How so? I feel like this could have worked perfectly fine before Jesus was even born. Though there is a literal temple and animal sacrifice, many other features of the Old Testament order, as given through Moses, are not mentioned. Though there is a literal temple and animal sacrifice, many other features of the Old Testament order, as given through Moses, are not mentioned. Okay. There is no mention of Pentecost, though other feasts are mentioned: Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Tabernacles and the First Fruits. Pentecost is not mentioned because it was fulfilled in the church. Acts 2. This is getting really interesting. There is no mention of a veil because since the work of Jesus, such a separation is no longer necessary. There is no mention of the Ark of the Covenant because the work of Jesus at the cross fulfilled the place of atonement and propitiation. There is no mention of a high priest because Jesus is the high priest. There is no mention of a king because Jesus is the King of Kings. There is no mention of silver and gold because in a millennial age, those things do not have the same value. This is getting really interesting. Ricky, what do you mean by that? You have a video up about it, but what do you mean they're trying to kill you? What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Ricky? Ezekiel isn't the only prophet who said there would be a holy temple during the kingdom age. You find the kingdom temple and kingdom worship mentioned in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joel, Micah, Haggai, and Zechariah. Ezekiel records God's promise to his people that he would put his sanctuary among them. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Indeed, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. It seems, therefore, that Ezekiel 40-48 may be primarily describing the millennial temple, its regulations for worship, and its tribal allotments. The millennium is only a beginning, sort of a microcosm of the eternal state and transition into it. Consequently, to observe reflections of Ezekiel 40-48 and the picture of the eternal state revealed in Revelation 21-22 should be expected and should not surprise the reader. The temple will be a place of learning for both Jews and Gentiles, and no doubt the worshippers will study the Old Testament law and learn more about Jesus. They will study the New Testament as well and see the deeper significance of the sacrifices and the feasts. This was really interesting. My only question is, during the when we were talking about the blueprints for Solomon's temple and the tabernacle, did we talk about all of these things? Because this commentary is using the process of elimination to say, hey, there was no mention of this, no mention of this, no mention of this, no mention of this. Therefore, since they left these things out, we can conclude or, narrow things down to we're talking about after the finished work of Jesus Christ. Yes, during Solomon's temple, I think we did mention a veil. We did mention the Ark of the Covenant. During the tabernacle, we did mention the high priest. I don't remember if we mentioned the high priest during the blueprints of Solomon's temple. The king, I don't know if Solomon was specifically mentioned during the blueprint section, but I mean, his presence was felt throughout because it was he built the temple. No mention of silver and gold, right? There was plenty mention of silver and gold in both the tabernacle and the temple. So maybe they do have a point here. That's really interesting.
Of the temple. The whole area surrounding the mountaintop is most holy. Behold, this is the law of the temple. These are the measurements of the altar in cubits. The cubit is 1 cubit and a handbreadth. The base 1 cubit high and 1 cubit wide, with a rim all around its edge of 1 span. This is the height of the altar. From the base on the ground to the lower ledge, 2 cubits. The width of the ledge, 1 cubit. From the smaller ledge to the larger ledge, 4 cubits. And the width of the ledge, 1 cubit. The altar hearth is 4 cubits high, with 4 horns extending upward from the hearth. The altar hearth is 12 cubits long, 12 wide, square at its 4 corners. The ledge 14 cubits long and 14 wide on its 4 sides, with a rim of half a cubit around it. Its base 1 cubit all around, and its steps face toward the east. Son of man, thus says the Lord God, these are the ordinances for the altar on the day when it is made, for sacrificing burnt offerings on it, and for sprinkling blood on it. You shall give a young bull for a sin offering to the priests, the Levites, who are of the seed of...
Sin offering. Doesn't sound like just for remembrance, as a memorial. This is for a sin offering. So I'm not so sure about what we just read in the commentary, that it's just used for memorial purposes. Then again, Ezekiel wouldn't, and the people of his time wouldn't be able to wrap their head around the idea of sacrificing as a memorial. A memorial to what? Jesus Christ didn't die on the cross yet. So I can completely see they prefaced the commentary we just read, prefaced this, that this is extremely not controversial, but there's many different interpretations about Ezekiel 40 to 48.
To the priests, the Levites, who are of the seed of Zadok, who approach me to minister to me. You shall take some of its blood and put it on the 4 horns of the altar, on the 4 corners of the ledge, and on the rim around it. Thus you shall cleanse it and make atonement for it. Then you shall also take the bull of the sin offering and burn it in the appointed place of the temple, outside the sanctuary. On the 2nd day you shall offer a kid of the goats without blemish for a sin offering, and they shall cleanse the altar as they cleansed it with the bull. When you have finished cleansing it, you shall offer a young bull without blemish and a ram from the flock without blemish. When you offer them before the Lord, the priests shall throw salt on them, and they will offer them up as a burnt offering to the Lord. Every day for 7 days you shall prepare a goat for a sin offering.
Yeah, it doesn't sound
they
like
shall also prepare a young bull and a ram from the flock, both without blemish. 7 days they shall make atonement for the altar and purify it, and so consecrate it. When these days are over, it shall be on the 8th day and thereafter that the priests shall offer your burnt offerings and your peace offerings on the altar, and I will accept you.
Dang. That was really interesting. That's that was interesting. That's gonna that's gonna take a lot of further thinking, pondering, and looking into. I mean, if you have well versed and well studied theologians coming to very different conclusions, right? We have the literal prophetic, the symbolic Christian, the dispensationalist, the apocalyptic. 4 different interpretations. And there might be more. This is just a compilation of different interpretations from John B. Taylor. So there might be even more interpretations. Let me know, what do you guys, how would you interpret Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48? Would you pick one of these interpretations? Do you align yourself more with one of these interpretations or a completely different other one? Let me know in the comment section. I think I'll probably make a poll on that. That'll be fun to do. So let me know your thoughts about this whole temple down in the comment section. We're good. We still have more to continue. Chapter 44 is continuing. We'll do that tomorrow. We're continuing on with the temple. So maybe we'll get more clues or will lead to more confusion. We'll find out tomorrow. So hope you guys enjoyed today's reading. I certainly did. I thought it was really interesting. Hope you guys did too. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow. All right? Take care. Bye-bye.